Before there was a sermon, there was a sound. Before there was a pulpit, there was a pulse. The kingdom has always had a rhythm, the steady beat of God's heart for the world. Our people know that beat. We heard it in the ring shout and the hush harbor. We marched to it from Selma to Montgomery, and we kept time with it in storefront churches when the world outside was on fire. The drum teaches us that church is not just a place you go, it's a movement you join. On Native Drums, for the last couple of weeks, we've been learning this movement step by step. We started with Good God Talk, naming that speech that is sacred, that the word makes the worlds and breaks chains, that in the Black sacred cosmos, freedom is not just optional, but ultimate. And the I is braided in the we, that concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are, and because we are, I am. We then moved to Good God Walk, remembering that leadership is a path, not a platform. Priestly care keeps souls, prophetic courage confronts systems, and healthy churches hold that holy tension without collapsing either side. See, when you move from God talk to God walk, you begin to embody the phrases that you say you hold sacred. You begin to hold your head high because you know that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. You begin to celebrate even in confusion and chaos, for you remember that all things work together. No. Better translation, that God works all things, that God weaves all things together. And the tapestry that is created through the transformation of the trauma is good, is very good. Then we moved to this idea of godly fellowship, this theology of fellowship, the walk behind the walk, where correction is received, failures are redeemed, and grace puts you back in the game. See, leaders are just taking a walk if there's no one following them. And followers must choose daily to pick up their cross, to confront whatever's challenging them, and still choose to follow the leadership that they have deemed trustworthy. There has to be a correlation between the pastor and the pew and the pastor and the people. In other words, the pew is just a microcosm. The pew is just a micro representative of the people that God has placed the leader in front of. And when you're a godly leader, you're not just leading the immediate congregation, you're leading the community, especially in the Black church. We've never had the benefit of just leading the people in the seats in front of us on Sunday, because we are tasked with champion the causes for the people who've seemed or felt too marginalized, too mocked, too left out, lost, looked over, and frowned upon to even step foot into the congregation. See, we have to be so connected to the community. We have to be so connected to the cause that we speak for those who can't hear us on Sunday, or those who only watch us on Sunday from the living rooms and from their phones while they're in their cars or in the stores because they don't feel worthy. It's up to us as godly leaders to restore the value of the person, right? Let me tell you what it looks like. It looks like Mark 5 when Jesus shows up on the shore of the Gadarenes and this man comes running out from the tombs. Now, it's amazing how the commentary for most of the first part of this story is negative. But from Jesus's perspective, he encounters a man. In other words, he sees the personhood before he sees the problem. And he doesn't pay attention to the commentary of the crowd because he decides rather than talking about the man, he talks to the man. Godly leadership requires that we're able to see the personhood, the godness of the people we encounter before we critique or criticize or challenge the problems that they face. But we have to also be at the same time, in order to build trust with the people we encounter, have to admit and acknowledge the fact that they are facing problems. And oftentimes the problems are out of their control or a result of systems that made them feel like there were no other options than to get into the problems that they are now bringing to us. The good godly follow just being leaders and follow collaborating so that we can do this next part, which was the good God work, the outward motion of Jesus's mission in Luke 4, the movement of Matthew 16, where Jesus declares that upon this rock I'll build my church. Not a building, not an institution, but an ecclesia, a called out people who have made the choice to follow the teachings, the life, the ministry, and the model of Jesus Christ. See, Jesus never purposed the church to be confined within a sanctuary, right? The sanctuary was what God established in the Old Testament through the tabernacle as a visible and ocular demonstration that God was present. God moved from being this pillar of fire by night and this cloud by day that originally led the Israelites out of Egypt into being this permanent placement that was transportable so that people remembered that wherever they were, God was. God is, because God always is. God never was. God never will be. The isness of God transcends time and location. That's what makes God omnipresent. And so then this God work is measured by Matthew 25, where Jesus tells this parable about the coming of the kingdom, where the sheep and goat that live together will be separated right side and left side. And the measure is, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to see about me. And it's not done because it's going to get you a photo op. It's not done because you pre-plan it to do it on Facebook so that you can get likes through the live. It's done as a lifestyle choice for everybody, equally distributed, because when they asked, the sheep asked, when did we see you naked and clothe you? When did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And Jesus says, listen, as often as you did this to the least of these, my brothers, and sisters, you did it unto me. Right? So this measure of the effectiveness of God work will only come through the adoption of a practice that suggests my daily life is filled with showing light. Right? That's what Matthew 5 was really saying, verse 16. Listen, so let your light so shine before others. Let your light so shine before others so that men may see your good works and glorify your God, which is in heaven. Right? In other words, you do it as a natural act. And the discipleship model should lead to the multiplication of light. What do I mean? It's not just the pastor's responsibility to be the light. It's the deliberate choice of those who choose to follow Christ and submit or come under the leadership of their pastor to also be light bearers, right? All of us should be reflections of the Jesus we say we serve. So you started with this blueprint in Acts 2, which is the safe model of the first century church, where everyone is saved, right? Everyone confesses Christ, but they all come from a similar religious tradition. They all are Jews who are in town for the festival of tents, right? The Pentecostal festival. They're there for a festival, a religious celebration, a Jewish celebration, but they decide in that moment to confess Christ and be baptized. And this community grows, but the awkward thing about this community and why it's so, God, I thank you, why it so resembles this current church is that it was an elitist organization because everyone in it was good and healed, right? There were no unclean people in this original congregation because you couldn't be unclean and worship in the sanctuary. And so we really see this power of Christianity and this power of God work manifest itself in chapter 3. Now you got to understand in chapter 3, because this first century church, though they were hiding, they still only knew how to worship God under the constraints and confines of their traditional setting, which means what do? They pressed their way to the temple for prayer. Even though they did everything else in hiding, they would step out because they looked like the current culture, the current church culture, as long as they went to prayer. And for the most part, they became so consumed with reestablishing and re-energizing their spiritual belief that they became tunnel vision by going to the church. And you know, it's echoed in this line that we miss sometimes, that we preach this and we shout over this, verse 27, verse 47 of chapter 2, where of Acts, where it says, and the Lord added to the church daily those who would be saved. Now, what this literally means is, as they interacted with people in the synagogue, they were able to convince them. And those in the synagogue became so envious of the tightness of the community of this first century way, this Jesus follower, that they started coming. But can I tell you who they never interacted with? Those who were sick, those who were homeless, those who were lame, those who were blind. And the evidence of this is again in chapter 3, where at the gate of Beautiful every day, a man was set who was lame. And all he did all day was beg. And his cup, his alms cup, his beggar's cup, was filled with money from those people who proceeded to the temple every day. And every Sunday, we step over the problems of society just to get to church, to testify that we made it, right? We have come into this house, gathered in his name to worship him, right? Right? I was glad when they said unto me, let us go to the house of the Lord. But in our procession, to the house of the Lord. And in their procession, this first century congregation that was going to the temple at the hour of prayer, they handed out money to the man, but they never attempted to help the man. And oftentimes we get so consumed with our handouts that we assume in our consumption of handout that that is God's desired way of helping. So what happens? James and John on this particular day decided that they were going to do something different. They engaged this man. Look upon me, right? And in those days, a person who was unclean could never look upon someone who was deemed clean. Then they said, silver and gold have I not, but such as I have, I give unto you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise and walk. They extended their hands and they touched him. In this, they were the most like Christ, because after the Sermon on the Mount, the first person Christ encounters were lame men, no, possessed men. And Jesus touches them. And in Jesus's touch of them, Jesus defies the current custom and risks being unclean for the sake of cleaning them up. And I don't know who I'm talking to, but part of the good God work is being willing to risk your status for the sake of saving someone else. It's willing to, in the words of the Impossible Dream, to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And so this healing at the gate is so transformational. Why? Because in their attempt to risk their status, the church grows even more exponential. Because this man who was lame now goes into the temple. He goes into the temple, and the people who stepped over him now see him in a new state. They come out to Solomon's porch and begin to engage with Peter and James, and Peter preaches again, and the numbers of the church grow. By the time he's finished, after being arrested and persecuted, to 5,000. Okay, you missed it, right? The good God work is willing to risk everything that's comfortable for the sake of changing and challenging the culture in order to change conditions. So tonight, we're going to tie all of this into a single chord, and we're going to call tonight, this final session, the Good God Church. Because talk that doesn't walk hollows out, walk that won't follow loses its way, and fellowship that won't stay theoretical, and fellowship that won't work stays theoretical. But when the church moves in God's rhythm, work, step, solidarity, service, the world hears the good news with a baseline. Let's set the frame. Lincoln and Mamiya describe the Black church as living in holy dialectics, priestly and prophetic, otherworldly and this worldly, communal and personal, charismatic and structured, resistance and survival. It's a dialectic, which means even though there is tension, it's unresolved tension. There is both thesis and antithesis, all working in synergy. So you are both priestly, right? Speaking the word of God, ministering to the people of God, but also prophetic, being the mouthpiece of God. You are otherworldly, heavenly and divine, but also this worldly, right? we talk about being in the world but not of the world, but how can you impact the world if you're not willing to roll up your sleeves and actively engage in the world? That's why in this politically charged climate, the church has to be willing to engage in voter registration, voter education, and voter transportation. It's not just enough to register, right? Even though many of the states, particularly I think Florida, right, had 10 million people that were um, eligible for registration, didn't register, but because they didn't register, they also didn't vote. So there has to be voter registration, education, and voter transportation. We got to take them to the polls. We got to take them to the polls. And listen, there's an amazing story about Mary McLeod Bethune, our South Carolina sister, who was threatened by the Ku Klux Klan as she was educating women to vote. Part of what happened while she was at Bethune-Cookman was the passing of the 19th Amendment, which I believe gave women the right to vote. And so she was educating. The Ku Klux Klan threatened her. The next day, she took 100 women to the polls. Now, this may not seem like a major feat, but here's the reality. Because in order to be able to vote, you had to be able to read, right? Read documents. So she would spend her nights teaching women and men how to read so that they could be able to pass the reading test so that then they could vote, right? Communal and personal, right? You don't have to separate, because again, this idea of Ubuntu suggests that when I do it for me, I'm doing it for us. And when I do it for us, I'm also assisting me. Then it has to be charismatic and structured. There's a big divide between charismatic church and this structured stoic church. But the idea is, to do the work of God, you have to be both. You have to be able to engage, and you have to have some sort of structure, some sort of systems in place to make sure that you're able to keep up with, to make sure that everyone is getting educated, everyone is getting reached, everyone is getting the word and the message. And can I tell you what I learned last week in leadership class? You can't get frustrated with repetition, right? One of the problems, and this is in a book, this is Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The Five Dysfunction of the Team. He also wrote this book about the 4 outrageous practices of an extraordinary executive. And he said this, he says, listen, it takes at least 6 times for somebody to actually hear you, right? Listen, whoa, because I know we don't like to repeat ourselves, but it takes at least 6 times for them to hear you, which means you have to exhaust yourself, because in order to be an effective communicator, you have to be willing to make sure that the person who you are communicating to is receiving and understanding the communication. So it has to be charismatic and structured, and it has to be about resistance and survival, which means you have to be, but you also have to be willing to protect so that the people and practices you're standing up for, or the problems you're standing up against, the people you're standing up for are safe from the problems you're standing up against. So we don't have to pick one and demonize the other. Our tradition moves among them as seasons and as the Spirit require. That dynamism is why we have been and must remain a reservoir of culture, conscience, and courage. We have to be the reservoir, right? And being the reservoir of culture means that though we are upset and angry about the reduction of slavery to not being so bad, and the removal of books from libraries and the removal of names from grave sites and the removing of items from the Smithsonian, we shouldn't rely on external systems to teach about us. How are they going to teach about us when we are the us that we have to teach about? Who knows our story, our emotions, our experiences better than us? We have to be the reservoir of conscience. We have to be the moral compass, not the moral compass as influenced by the colonizing critique of evangelical Christian national perspectives. We have to be the moral conscious based on the Afrocentric, our African spirituality, our African history before. Because see, here's the thing: most of the values and morals that we hold in esteem are not what we really believe. They were what were forced upon us, what were beat into us and lynched into us and whipped into us in order to conform us to a docile creature that was afraid of being dominant, afraid of walking in the fullness of who God created us to be, afraid of regaining our king and queen status. And then we have to be the reservoir of courage. Hope has to rely on us, has to lie in us. And the hope that lies in us is not scared hope. It's not faulty hope. It's not flickering and wavering hope. It's a hope that is substantive to our faith. Come here, Hebrews. Faith is, now faith is. This current faith we have is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And if we can't be hopeful, if we can't continue to encourage, if we can't speak the words of David, I would have lost heart, I would have fainted, Psalm 27:13, unless I believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. In other words, listen, I get that. Steal away, don't have long to be here. I get that up above my head. I get that soon, and very soon we're going to see the king. But until then, we have to have hope that God doesn't have to get us to heaven to heal us, to deliver us, to set us free, and to restore our joy, that God can bring heaven to earth. So when accommodations pressed in, the church held the line on freedom. When resources were stolen, the church birthed schools, birthed credit unions, birthed mutual aid and movement. The church didn't wait. The Black church didn't wait for it to be created for us. The Black church did what Shirley Chisholm said: when they won't invite you to the table, you build your own. You bring your chairs, right? You bring a folding chair, you build your own tables. That is the story we inherited, but it's also the assignment we accept. Franklin reminds us to think in terms of the village and its anchor institutions. Church, family, school. These are the anchor institutions of the Black community: the church, the family, and the school, the college, aligned and moving in rhythm. When those anchors pull together, our people mobilize regardless of who holds power elsewhere. Franklin pushes us past vague inspiration towards strategic action and accountability. Simple, repeatable practices that ritualize our mission. Don't wait on distant saviors. Build weekly habits that make service muscle memory. In Franklin's words, We are the ones we've been waiting for. If we are the village, then we must be the village our neighbors need. Public health scholarship puts receipts on what our elders already knew. The Black church is a long-standing institutional backbone and a trusted gateway for change. When partnerships honor the church's voice, meet congregations where they are, and invest for the long haul, outcomes shift. Health knowledge rises, diets improve, people move more, cardiovascular risks drop, and access to mental health care increases. Coalitions like the Balm in Gilead show what happens when you convene pastors, public agencies, and universities around the same table. Soul stirring and system shaping work at scale. The rule is simple: adaptability, trustworthiness, and relationships measured in years, not weeks. And let's tell the truth. Women have led much of this backbone work: feeding ministries, health fairs, counseling circles, policy advocacy, and stigma breaking conversations that save lives. One of the interesting things about Mary McLeod Bethune is that oftentimes we limit her to being an educator, not realizing that she was the first governmental employee, not realizing that she was an advocate and fundraiser that led organizations like the NAACP, the National Council for Negro Women. She led several organizations. She was able to be instrumental in the formation of not only the Tuskegee Airmen, but also the United Nations. Now let's hear as a reminder the scriptures as the good God church in motion. You ready? Here's the mandate. Luke chapter 4, 16 through 21. Jesus unrolls Isaiah and announces a job description. Good news to the poor, release to captives, sight to the blind, freedom for the oppressed. James Cone reminds us if the gospel isn't in solidarity with the oppressed, it's not the gospel of Jesus. Katie Geneva Cannon calls us to do the work our souls must have. Ethics that meets survival, sermon that meets supper. Alan Hirsch and Michael Frost press a missional posture. Don't obsess over getting them to come. Ask God how to faithfully go. And Franklin would say, don't ask the village to find you, be the village that finds them. In our history, women made that real. Septima Clark turning literacy into liberation, Mary Church Terrell and Ida B. Wells naming truth that others fear, living Luke 4 without waiting for permission, being the book, not just reading the book. The movement is expressed in Matthew 16:18. On this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Gates are stationary. The church is not. Aubrey Malphurs warns that inward maintenance mode churches drift off mission. Alan Roxbury cautions that attractional religion turns the church into a vendor of religious goods and services. Franklin answers that with a practice, 30 minutes a week, every member commits to one concrete act of village service: mentor at school, check on isolated elders, volunteer with a reentry program, meet with a council member, deliver groceries, ritualize mission until movement becomes ordinary. The measure, again, is Matthew 25, 34 through 40. Jesus measures faithfulness by mercy, hungry fed, bodies clothed, strangers welcomed, sick and in prison visited. Tony Evans says the church isn't a cruise ship with the captain and passengers, it's a battleship where everyone has a role. From a womanist lens, Dolores Williams lifts survival and quality of life as theological priorities. Franklin keeps time with that truth. The village thrives when anchors pull together, church with family, school with clinic, book club with barbershop, so the most vulnerable rise first. Fannie Lou Hamer lived that measure. Hospitality as protest, courage as curriculum, care as strategy. The blueprint, Acts chapter 2, 43 through 47, teaching table, prayer, and sacred resources, shared resources until no one is in need. Darrell Gruder says mission isn't a program of the church, it's the essence of the church. David Bosch says mission participates in the liberating reign of Jesus, not recruitment to our brand. The data agrees. When the church assets are honored and organized, whole community outcomes move. Franklin calls these anchor plays. Open the building for counseling hours. Host a neighborhood resource hub with case management right after service. Run a micro grant table so crisis doesn't become catastrophic. Budget toward belonging. Aim your building at the neighborhood. Woo! If your building is only opened on Sunday and Wednesday, it's not worth having. And then the witness comes in Acts chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. At the gate called Beautiful, a man asked for coins. Peter and John offer something greater, restoration in Jesus' name. Roxburgh's caution stands. Vendors hand out trinkets. Missionaries offer what God empowers: dignity, healing, agency, community. Think of Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner linking pastoral care with policy reform. Think of Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed, fighting for schools and anti-poverty programs. That's Acts 3. Alan Hirsch reminds us when the church is in mission, it is finally being itself. Every believer is sent. Every place is a missions field. So what does good God church look like right now? Let's braid the threads into the rule of life. Talk like freedom people. Name wounds and announce healing. Walk like resurrection people toward gates, not away. Follow like beloved people. Receive correction, return to love, get recommissioned. Work like justice people. Keep tables open, share budgets, feed neighbors, change systems, and be the church like a movement. Missional, not attractional. Public, prophetic, and participatory. And let's be specific about resilience in the face of racialized trauma. New clergy interviews from the COVID era and the aftermath of George Floyd found 7 concrete responses the Black church used to help our people recover and rise. Hear these out as a shared rule of life and a checklist for design. First, license mental health providers on site or on call, because sometimes the miracle looks like a therapist and a safe room. Second, external resource linkage. Clinics, hospitals, shelters, legal aid, employment, because healing is holistic. Third, trauma awareness. Preached, taught, and practiced. Language for wounds and tools for care. Fourth, comfort and relational support. Presence, accompaniment, grief holding, a ministry of showing up and presence. Fifth, spiritual interventions. Prayer, lament, ritual, scripture, deliverance, because the soul needs tending as much as the body. Sixth, sermon and teaching on race and racism, naming harm and forming conscience, telling the truth that sets people free. And seventh, material and financial support, rent help, groceries, medicine, transportation. Hold on, wait. Because when I say medicine, I'm talking about copay and coverage. COVID, the cost for COVID medicine is in the hundreds, even with insurance. How are we helping with copays? How are we helping with groceries? How are we helping with transportation? This is mercy with receipts. The study's conclusion is our confirmation. Sacred spaces with a shared cultural experience are vital for trauma recovery. The Black church is a suitable partner for resilience. Said another way, Acts 2 with clinical clarity, Luke 4 with a care team, Matthew 25 with a follow up plan. And now Franklin's addendum for accountability, the village rhythm. 30 minutes each week. Every member, one concrete act. Mentor a child, call a widow, advocate at the school board, walk a neighbor through a benefits application, deliver a meal. 30 minutes a week will not fix the world, but it will fix our muscle memory. It keeps the beat steady. Movements are built for what ordinary people do consistently together. Let me say that again a little more clearer. Movements are built from what ordinary people do consistently together. Leaders set the tempo, but don't drown out the choir. Measure success by sending capacity, not seating capacity. Woo! Measure success by sending capacity, not seating capacity. Followers, your weekday yes shapes your Sunday sound. Churches become what disciples practice Monday through Saturday. And to the women, organizers, pastors, protesters, scholars, thank you for keeping time when others drifted off beat. In this house, womanist wisdom doesn't wait in the footnotes, it wears the mic. The drum is still beating, the spirit is still moving, the work is still waiting. Will you keep beat with us? Will you talk, walk, follow, and work so the church can be the church? For every Martin, there was a Coretta. For every Malcolm, a Betty. For every microphone, a mother of the church humming a prayer, tapping a foot, playing a tambourine that held us together. We honor the women who kept the rhythm and we follow their lead. I'm Napoleon Bradford. This is Native Drums. Until next time, speak well, walk true, follow close, work bold, and be the church. Keep the beat. God bless you, and to God be the glory.